Okay, so this video is going to be a little different, mainly because I know this video will live forever. There's like zero information about any of this stuff anymore, and so I had to fumble through it myself to figure this out. So essentially what I did is I bought every part I could think of. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that with a car that's 20 years old, a lot of parts aren't like readily available. Unless I want this to take 3 years to build, I have to make some choices on what stuff I can get and what I can't. And so, you know, the hard race parts seem pretty good to me, and they're available, and so we put them on the car. And so what I'm going to do is explain to you what is done, what I now know. I'm not 100% certain because I haven't been able to drive the car yet, but you're going to see a front suspension video and then a rear suspension video, and I'm going to show you the completed project, and then we'll cut to, if you want to watch the whole thing, cut to all the fumbling and fidgeting and trying to get things done. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I'm going to kind of point out some of the things on the suspension. So what we have is a custom valve, custom springed, remote reservoired, three-way Moton suspension. Retail, I think, is like $12,800. So more than the freaking car is probably really worth. And so what I wanted to put some ridiculous suspension on, but I didn't want it to be super harsh. And so my friend Sean, who owns Precision Sport Industries, PSI, in Orlando, is also the Moton AST rep in the United States. So he co-owns the rights to sell the product. And so he said, why don't we do a Moton suspension on this thing, go ridiculous. And so that's what we did. So nothing dramatic about putting this in, other than the difficulty was trying to figure out how this thing is mounted. And you'll see in the video that there's virtually no droop. And the reason for that is the base, or the perch that connects to the drop fork on the Moton, has 3 different positions, and I had it in position 1, the lowest position, which meant the car was just way too low, even with the spring perch all the way up to the top. Right now we have it about 3/4 of the way up in order to sort of get it to fit where I needed to, with the appropriate amount of preload and the appropriate amount of ride height. So I haven't mounted the uppers yet, but I'm basically going to end up doing some sort of zip tying or some sort of clamp onto the Mugen strut tower brace. We're able to run the lines, the gas and oil lines. There's some oil and some gas in these lines that I'm able to run up into the engine bay and then mount to the strut tower brace. So the main thing here, you'll see us in the video kind of screw up figuring out how to mount the thing. There's actually on the drop fork, let me show you that here. There's a little cutout, you can see here, where the bolt just barely, where the bolt comes through here, through the side, and then the bolt will essentially contact or lock into one of these channels. There's 3 channels on the perch or the base of the shock. You need to put it in the bottom position, unless you're for some reason going to do wider fenders and slam the thing on the ground. So then you'll notice the hard race drop fork is in my hand. It's not on the car. I put the OE drop forks back on. You'll see in the video, we put these drop forks in. We end up with the car being too low. This is about 1.5 inches or 2 inches shorter, and so I didn't need that extra drop. We needed actually the height. The way that the Motons are set up, we ended up needing to put the OE drop forks back on, which is fine, which meant I could put the OE bolt back on. The hard race drop forks in the US don't come with hardware, and so I had to find my own hardware, and so you need to order a 120 millimeter bolt, and then you want to have these flange ends, and so I could only find a black oxide version at McMaster, because this bolt is 110 millimeters. It's about 10 millimeters too short. So if you are going to do the drop forks, because you have a suspension that doesn't drop as much as the Moton, then you would you would need to get some hardware for it. So I had to overnight that, and it came, and then we ended up taking the drop forks off because the car was too low. So we ended up using the OE fork, OE hardware here, and everything sort of worked out. When we drop this all out, you'll see us drop it all out of the car. The subframe, in order to do the spoon rigid collars, think about this. There's a hole in the frame of the car, and there's a hole in the subframe. The subframe is what holds the engine and everything in place. So there's the subframe, which at the factory is mated to the body. Right, and so generally all the chassis will be put together, all the suspension, the engine, everything, and then they'll drop the body on top of the subframe. Well, there are two holes that line up where the subframe connects to the body. Here's one bolt right here on the backside. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts on each side of the car. 2 of them are up under here that connect near the sway bar, and there's one in the front here, and then there's one toward the middle of the car. And so in order to make that subframe align perfectly, because the holes are oversized, so when they made it and they put the bolts in, they don't damage anything. And so the bolts are smaller than the holes, so what can happen is the holes can end up off center. And so Spoon makes something called a rigid collar, and what that collar does is has sort of like a V shape or a cone shape to these washers, and it brings the two frames in alignment and basically makes the the bolt pull everything straight. So now the subframe is aligned. Most cars, like an S2000 have done before, the subframe just drops down nice and easily. You take one bolt out, it drops down, you pry it out, and you put the washer in. You'll see us struggle with that. This car doesn't drop down. We remove the rear engine mount, you need to remove that. We disconnected the steering column, which you need to do that from the inside the car, and then using 4 people to pry it under and slide the washers in and try to get them all lined up. So that's something you need to keep in mind if you're going to do the rigid collar. I'm sure there was some bolt or something that we were missing that would allow it to drop down, but I don't know, the thing just wouldn't frickin' drop. And so we had to use a crowbar to get that done. The sway bar on the front of this car, nobody makes a front sway bar. I talked to the guys at Hard Race, talked to Mark at Hard Race USA. They've done a lot of racing with these cars, a lot of track driving. He said, don't mess with the front sway bar. I don't think anybody makes one. There's really not much you can do. They do make front sway bar end links, but I just left the stock ones alone. So you disconnect the sway bar and then just reattach it when it's said and done. The lower control arms are actually pretty easy. The Hard Race lower control arms have a different bushing. You could do pillow balls, which would be a solid bushing, which I didn't choose, or you can do their new upgraded urethane bushing. So this is a urethane bushing brace. Pretty simple. You'll see us do that install. Not too difficult to do. The brakes. So the brakes are problematic. What I didn't know, because I didn't read the instructions, because I never do, you'll see us fumble through this. The brake rotor fits with the 4-piston caliper, or the twin blocks, but you need a spacer. And Spoon makes a 3mm hub spacer for the back side of this, otherwise it won't fit. And I don't even solve that in the video. I'm telling you this now. It's a $75 part. You need to order with whatever rotors you get, whether you get Mini Cooper rotors or you get these or the Honda. These are probably like from an Accord or something. It's a Honda part number, but they are they come in a Spoon box. But you can see it doesn't attach. There's no mounting screws. What'll happen is once I bleed the brakes, it'll cinch down, and then the lugs hold it in place. But we found that the thing wouldn't spin because this needs to be spaced out in order to center up on our caliper. So I'm waiting for that spacer. I've got to make some calls after this video and hope that we can get what we need. Another mistake that I found, I did upgraded tie rods, and you'll see right now they look like OE tie rods. These are a Hard Race with a different ball joint, but the original idea was we would be low enough that we would do their reverse mount or their undermount version. And so Hard Race sells an anti-bump steer kit where you have this. You have this undermount or undermount version, which would mount upside down, and so it mounts to the underside instead of the top side. But the problem is that my car, we never got low enough for it to matter, so it kept pulling toe in. It was very clear that wasn't going to work, and so I got the last set in the US of the hard race, sort of OE type traditional mounted tie rods. So don't mess with these undermount tie rods. All the guys who've tried it before were right. It's not that there's anything wrong with these. There's nothing wrong with these tie rods. It's just this is for like extreme race applications where the car is extremely, extremely low, which I'm not going to be. So keep that in mind. The other thing you probably don't need to do, especially on a 25,000 mile car, hard race does have a steering, the inner tie rod replacement. I did order some boots and some clamps and everything. I didn't want to cut the factory boot off, which is really nice still. It's not brittle or anything. Again, this is a 20,000 mile car, so I never did replace these. So I actually have these extra parts, which I'm not going to be using here. So just keep that in mind. If you have an older car, I would absolutely replace the boots and everything and do that. So rigid collar was a pain in the butt. It took us a while to figure out drop forks and all of that. Still waiting on a spacer right now. I have some 3mm washers behind here, which I can't drive the car yet. I'm waiting to bleed the brakes. No major issues with the spoon brake lines. So everything's good there. I don't have any leaking or anything like that, so everything's good. And then the hard race upper camber, the upper A-arm or the upper control arm here, so everything seems okay there. And so everything's nice, clean, neat, organized, and set up. So the front suspension took me a solid 2 days of fumbling through to figure out, what's what. I'm going to drive the car and decide how it feels before I do the last thing, which may be to do a roll center adjuster. So this is another thing that I may end up doing, which is a major project, which means I have to disconnect this, take the brake off, take the entire hub, the front of the hub off, take the drive shaft bolt off. I actually ordered some new bolts because you'd have to replace the bolt if you're going to take this off, or at least you should. I, of course, painted this here, so I'd have to repaint it again. But the idea here would be this extends the ball joint and the very bottom of the lower control arm, where the lower control arm meets the hub. And so what essentially happens is the angles from the top of the shock down to the bottom. So if you went from the top of the shock over there to the bottom of this pillow ball, or I guess not pillow ball, but this ball joint, when you lower the car, you change, the center of gravity. You change the fulcrum point to somewhere outside and below the car. And so what you need to do is you need to change the center, the roll center. The roll center would be, the center of the car. You need to change the roll center to be at the bottom of the wheel or the bottom of the tire, rather than somewhere out here in some virtual space. And so these roll center adjusters, RCAs, is basically just a new mount, which, and I talked to John at LHT, he said, look, we never had these back in the day. We were just fine. We all slammed our cars. So you may or may not see a video of me taking these apart. I bought all the tools. I'm waiting on some ball joint separator. I have the ball joint separator tool, but now I need to get a bearing press to press this out, a ball joint press. So we may do that. And so that's the front suspension. Let's get into the install of it. There's lots and lots of footage of us doing it, but all these lessons I learned, stay with some OE version of the tie rod. Don't do an undermount. Make sure you know or take note that if your coilover has multiple mounting points on the base of it, that you're likely not going to be able to do a drop fork and a lowered suspension and have any chance of fitting the car. And then you need, if you're going to do spoon calipers on an EM1 Civic, you need the 3mm spacer, otherwise it doesn't work. They show you there's a washer that on some cars, like a DC2, you would just take the washer and put it in between. The there's a washer on the 17mm bolts in the back. It doesn't work on this car. You need a hub spacer in order for this to work, and then we'll be good to go. So that's the front. Okay, the rear suspension for this car, there won't be a separate episode of this. This will be, we did a live stream, so I live streamed the install of the rear stuff. So you can go check out that episode if you're interested. But let me just dig into some of the things I've learned, and you can always go watch me do the install of that stuff. So I have Moton three-way remote reservoir. I forget the model. I think is it Moton 5200. These are a custom valved, custom spring set. What I asked my friends at Moton to do was to make it very, very streetable and basically make a poser version of a three-way suspension. So that's what we got. But I mean, retail on the coilovers is like 12.8 or something crazy like that. So I didn't pay quite that much for it, but I did pay a lot of money for it still. I just wanted some ridiculous dream coilover on the car, and so that's what we got. Nothing remarkable about the mounting of these, other than I had to source my own bolts for the bottom. The factory bolt was too short, wouldn't fit. And so I needed to, and luckily I had some 12-point bolts that worked out well, and puts a little bit of Loctite on here, and a stainless lock nut on the back side. But there was nothing remarkable about doing the rear coilover. You'll see in the video how I basically take all the lower parts out, take the tie rod up or the camber arm off the top, just drop the suspension out. I'd already cut some slits in the carpet for my Mugen rear strut tower brace, so everything kind of worked out real seamlessly with the coilover. Nothing like the front where we had to figure out positions and things like that. Once I figured out the bottom bolt, everything was clean and done. One really disappointing thing, and I've actually ordered some new rotors, is the spoon rotors. So if you order spoon 14-inch rears, they don't fit. They won't fit. I think Willwood makes a rear caliper, but that has the e-brake integrated, but none of the JDM stuff, Endless or Spoon or Project Mu, none of them, from what I can tell, make a rear brake for this car. So I decided to just paint it, put the spoon pads in here. Again, we'll put a new, I did paint the hub here, but we're going to do a new, we'll do a new OE rear rotor, which I probably don't even need to do, but I ordered a new one, should be here in a few days. But yeah, the spoon doesn't fit, it's too big, and then when you put the bracket on, the bolts won't fit. And so I primed this and just painted it with a brush. The smart thing to do would be to remove the caliper. It's just such a pain to deal with the e-brake. So rather than removal and rather than spray and get overspray over everything, I just painted it. Upper tie arms or upper toe arms. This is how you adjust your camber, and we'll kind of show you how to do that in the video. But I would suggest that just set it. Don't worry about the length of your OE camber arms. Just set it to make sure it's even and turned all the way in, so it would be at maximum camber. And once you put the wheel on, you can easily just reach in here and turn to adjust camber. I'd highly recommend that you get the ones that is the complete piece, and because I think you can reuse the OE bracket on one version of the tie rod or the toe arm, but just get the full aggressive camber version. Lower control arms, piece of cake, nothing there. You do need, from what I understand, it wouldn't have worked well, but you do need, these are blocks, adjustable sway bar end lengths. So if you're going to do a new sway bar, you're going to need an adjustable version of it. And so Blocks makes one. I don't think Blocks is a particularly high-end company, but they're one of the few companies that makes an adjustable sway bar end length, so make sure you do that. And then there was nothing remarkable about putting, there's lots and lots of companies that make this center brace and rear sway bar assembly with lower control arms, all this bolted right back in place with an OE bolt here and the one that connects to the hub. but the rear suspension was rather simple to do. Brake lines were easy to do. Everything should be pretty easy. Now, the one thing that is, I think, pretty cool here. Think about this. These coilovers have a remote reservoir, and I would love to mount the reservoirs up in the car. One thing I didn't think ahead, Moton actually sells a quick disconnect kit where you can quick disconnect your lines. I didn't opt for that. I wasn't thinking ahead of where the heck I'm going to put these reservoirs. And so yes, the knob is down here underneath the car. Yes, these are all factory sealed and weather tight. Think of this like a Ford Raptor suspension or something where you do a three-way, and a lot of times they'll mount the reservoir, next to the shock, so it's okay if they get wet and dirty. But Renscott is a company that makes reservoir mounts. And so I took and mounted to the frame rail in the back here, get you some shots of that, and then just kind of wire tied and tucked the remote reservoir cable or line up underneath the car here, so I can very easily access the suspension adjustment. Again, I'm more likely going to get the suspension set up the way I want and then leave it alone. And so it'll be a real simple, just reach under the rear bumper here and make my adjustments. But we did that to both sides. I don't want to drill a 3-inch hole up through the car somewhere like the little rain drip spot. There's just not enough room to get up into the trunk area without drilling a substantial hole. I didn't want to do that and do it in two different sides. So instead we just mounted the reservoirs nice and cleanly down here. But when you look at the car from the back, it looks so freaking cool. Even though there's a bunch of different colors, there's different blues and different blacks and orange from the Moton, I think it looks great. The painted calipers and wheels and everything looks clean and set up. And then we did sort of pseudo roll the fenders. I'm sending it down to Michael Good at the Dent Company. He's going to roll them flat, or as flat as we can get them in the rear here. So we have a dent, a slight little crease that he's going to pull as well, and get the fenders rolled so that we can fit as wide of a tire as possible. So that's the rear suspension. Let's get into the install. By the way, we added, when I do the lower traction arm, if we ended up doing that, it needs to be welded. There's some brackets need to be welded. We gained about 34 pounds between the brakes and all the parts and pieces that we put on this thing. It was 34 pounds heavier than stock. So luckily I did a battery and a carbon fiber hood to offset that. So let's get into the install. All right, I can't call you little Honda Bros on this one. This is big Honda Bro territory. So what we're gonna do is suspension and brakes. And I kind of went all out. I guess I've gone all out on pretty much everything on this car, but I went a little nutty on some of these things. I'll explain everything as we install it, but I don't know how this video is gonna come together, but we're gonna do front suspension first. Try to figure out where to put the remote reservoirs on the Moton 3-ways and figure out things like roll center adjusters or drop forks, and I'm just gonna kind of work through it. I have some idea of how this is gonna go, but like I've never done a suspension on a Civic before. I always paid someone to do it back in the day with money that I didn't really have. So now here the tables are turned. I could just pay someone to do this, but yet I'm going to do it myself for some stupid reason. But anyway, we've got all separate components. I'm most excited about feeling the transformation of this car. About the only thing that I don't think we're going to see significant improvement on would be the steering rack. The steering ratio is pretty brutal on these things. That was the one shocking thing, is that how much you got to turn the wheel just to make a 3-point turn. So again, I would like to break it up and doing the brakes and the suspension, but they all kind of work hand in hand. And so I think the thing to do is going to be to take this completely apart and then put it back together, because we're going to drop the subframe down, do the rigid collars, and do all these little parts and pieces. So I think I'll save you the pain here of explaining each one of these, and we'll explain each one as we install it and why I chose it and sort of the functionality. But really, we got 3 different brands. We got Moton are the coilovers, Hard Race are all the little suspension braces and components, and then Spoon would take up the duties on the brakes. And Spoon rigid collars. So really it's just 3 brands of products that are all going to kind of work together and go from there. So I guess let's get started, and let's vaporize some money here, because that's basically what I did with all this stuff. So all right, let's get set up underneath the car. I already took the wheels off, and let's start ripping stuff apart, see what happens. Okay, all right, so we're going to start. So what we're going to do, I'm going to hang the caliper off to the side. That way I don't have to bleed the brake master cylinder as well. So we'll save this for last. I kind of wanted to take it off and get it out of the way, but if I hang it out here out to the side, we should be fine. I'm going to clean this all and probably steam clean it and coat it and all at the end of this. But we're going to get started by taking the rotor off and just start disconnecting crap. So let me get the caliper off of here. I took the hub-centric ring off. We're gonna clean that up as well once we get the rotor taken off. So I think I'm gonna do gloves, stay somewhat clean here today, because I'm gonna be multiple days into this project. So now let's start with taking the caliper off. Gonna make some zip ties. Got my assistant Dave here today. Gonna hold some. Can you put like 3 zip ties together or so, something like that? All right. So this should be what, 15 millimeter, 16, 17. At the end of this, we'll have all of our Civic sizes memorized to never do this again. Although if this Civic buys me a 488 Speciale after our giveaway, then maybe I'll do a Type R next. Why are you wasting all this money on this piece of crap car? God dang. Yeah. Gotta make sure these. I wonder if these are OE Honda. I don't know if they'll be stamped. Those pads are not. They're really, really bad. This thing does not stop. Keep everything, catalog it for the next guy. And by catalog it, I mean throw it in a giant box. When I had this Civic back in the day, I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. I still don't know how to do any of this stuff, but the difference is I'm willing to give it a try. And then when I got my S2000, that's when I started. My buddies Clay and Mike started talking me into doing stuff on my own. Gosh. Everything's factory fresh from 20 years ago. We're really molesting this thing. But you'll notice, I mean, there's already aftermarket springs and aftermarket camber kit on this thing, so we're not ruining it. Okay, now let's see if we can get this off. Sweet. All right, so I'm gonna slide it through there, I think. That can sit right there, nice and out of the way. So let's get our rotor off. Let's see, probably have to do the old impact thingy on this. Help me out in the comments. What is this thing called? The impact driver, I think. There we go. Yeah, it's a good thing I brought this old rusty thing over from the house. Otherwise we'd be tapping these out, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but you just twist, hammer. So then,
Take this guy off. I don't know. I would think it would say Honda on here. I don't think these are OE. I mean, with 25,000 miles, you'd think they would be. So here's the size difference. So if we just take a look at just sheer size. So obviously the hubs are going to be the same. So we've got, how do they measure these? I'm assuming they measure the diameter. Just see what the diameter difference is. So we're going to be adding some weight here. So we weighed every individual component. 11 inch versus 10 1/4. So we have 3/4 of an inch. What size are the rotors on the GT3? Like 18 inches or something like that. So then we're going to weigh each of these components. My guess is probably going to add 20 pounds worth of braces and stuff like that. So I think the hub is fine. I don't, a 25,000 mile car, I didn't buy a new hub or new studs. These all look nice, clean. So I don't think we need to really worry about changing anything there. I think the dust shield is also going to be fine. I wonder if it'd be helpful. Yeah, it doesn't look like you can remove the dust shield unless you take the hub off, which we're not going to do. So we're going to leave that alone. All right, so I think we can start working on, we're going to be dropping out the lower control arm here. So we have a new lower control arm, which is this big black piece here. So the new lower control arm is this. It's the same. It's a factory part from Hard Race, but it has different bushings. And I didn't want to do solid bushings because I don't want my teeth rattling. But we're doing so we're doing some stiffer, better, fresher urethane bushings. So I think this piece here is staying, whatever that thing is called. But this here is coming out, and same thing with our coilover. So I think we should probably pull our drop fork bolt out. We'll drop our sway bar end link off. So I'm going to do the sway bar end link first. We're not replacing the sway bar. I don't think there's really any advantage to changing the sway bar on the front sway bar on these cars. So let's take the sway bar end link off. And so I want to drop all this stuff down because we're going to be doing, let's see if I can get this in here. We're going to be doing the rigid collar. Nice. So again, this is why we did you do a nice car and you end up with nice clean components that we're going to be swapping out, so we don't have to get blow torches and stuff like that out on this thing. Okay, so there's the sway bar end link off. I might have to take it completely off because it's kind of stiff, or we'll put a pole jack underneath here. Gosh, I'm not really finding the need to do any major power tools here on this thing. Oops. Yeah, we're gonna need the pole jack under here, I think, to bring this thing up. So now, one of the questions is going to be, do we do the roll center adjuster, or do I do the drop fork? The drop fork certainly looks prettier. The question is, how am I going to get this out of here? I think I'm going to drop it down from the top. I think in order to get this all to release, I'll just drop the top bolts, and then this whole thing will come down. Use a little 3/8 right angle impact here. Guaranteed I get all these bolts confused by the end of this. There we go. That way. So there we go. There's the factory one. We're going to weigh all this stuff. So if we get this out, then I can get this out of the way, and then this whole thing will just sit nice and pretty. That saved me some pain. So there's our maybe Eibach camber arm. Looks like the boot's all beat up. I've been on here for a long time. Look, it's ripped. So I think what I'm probably going to have to do, because I need to get the sway bar end link out. I don't want all that weight is sitting on it right now. So I think I'm going to put the pull jack under here, because this whole lower control arm is coming out. We're going to replace this. Okay, we're still gonna have to drop the sway bar off. Those bolts are gonna be really long. Shoot. This is bad, because we can't put the car back down on the ground. It's gonna be close. No. I knew it. I knew it. Yeah, that's what we could do. You could lift it up and put another block under there. You can slide that out. That should just come off. Yep. Now we got enough room where I can whack this off of here. And then I'll do the old whackaroo on it. Boom. That was my plan. It actually worked. Like, I wonder, like you're saying, if we get this thing up in the air, if I get, put another block under this and I get another couple of inches, then we ought to be able to do the rigid collar kit as well. So see this here? So this bolt, the whole subframe of the car drops down. You just need like an inch or so we can slide these little collars in there. On S2000 it makes a big difference. I think on this car it might do okay too. It's just the scissor lift kind of messed us up on that one side because I didn't center the car. All right, today's frickin' day 2 of this stupid rigid collar crap. I just can't give up. So the whole subframe needs to just droop a little bit, right? So you take the bolt out. So take this bolt out, and it should be able to take one bolt out at a time. So I've taken the rear motor mount off, just disconnect the steering rack, and so now we kind of have a little bit of play. But like on the S2000, you just take the bolt out and it just droops down and you put the thing under. But apparently we're not that lucky. So the way that this works, if you look at this here, so if you look at this thing, can you see that? So this is the body, and that's the subframe. And so there are two holes. Hole here, so take the bolt out. You got a hole here and a hole here. Well, they make the hole too big, right, on all these cars, and they do that so that they can mate the subframe to the body of the car. And so what these collars do, if you'll notice, so the hole here that this goes up into, the hole, there's a lot of play. And so what these collars do, and we're going to grease them, but the collar is this machine the same size as the bolt, and then there's a taper, and that taper helps so that it keeps the frame of the body and the frame from shifting. Because what can happen is if you have two holes that are too big, the bolt goes down the center, but then you can have them off center, if that makes sense. And so what this will do is make sure that
everything sits nice and flush. Now, the problem is, I need this to drop down enough so that I can fit this thing up in here. And so we're gonna have to jam something in there and hope that I don't smash my frickin' fingers. And that's the part that is a little tricky. And there are 4 or 3 different bolts that we've got to work with here. And this one's still a problem. So I'm still gonna have to pull jack this thing up, put a bigger block so I can get these bolts out. So anyway, I should probably take the tie rod off and just get this thing out of the way. So I've got 1 bolt, 2 bolts, 3 bolts that you've got to, or the subframe mates to the body of the car. The darn scissor lift is like 1 millimeter too big. I just did it backwards. I should have put the extension on the back of the car, not on the front of the car, but we're stuck with it right now. I need to lift this up a little bit higher so that I can get the collar on this side. And I should probably do this back part first because I know I can do this, but I need to make sure that I can do this. There's not a single photo, not a video, not a description anywhere online to help me out with this thing here. This is part of the reason why I bought this car, was to be able to put that information back out into the world. Freaking sway bars in the way. This is a little bit shady, but I just need to get. So remember, the short bolt goes in the back. The long bolt is 42 feet long. Just long enough to annoy the crap out of me. So now, I think I can probably just put the block under it. I'm just gonna leave that under there until I get this subframe thing worked out. And the question is, this is super shady. I'll hold it nice and sturdy with the at the proper height. Sweet. The question is, can we get this spread out enough? Get the bolts under there without smashing my fingers. So you're only supposed to take out 1 bolt at a time, but I can't get the frickin' subframe to, it won't drop. But it's still attached to something, I just don't know what. So what we gotta do, use the supplied grease, keep them from making noise, just to make sure we get it all over everything. Okay, Dave, so you see what we gotta do? We gotta pry this thing down so I can sneak this up on top of this hole. I just don't understand why it won't. There's nothing holding it. Bent the crap out of it. God dang it. I think we should just give up this whole game. Why would this not? Like, there's nothing attached to it. Everybody, come try to pry this thing down while I put this thing in. We're gonna have like 14 screwdrivers in there so that my fingers don't get smashed. Big screwdriver right here. It's time to hold this one down. Okay, go.
Yeah, you're gonna have to.
Okay, I can see it from here, so if we do it, I can grab it from underneath here. All right, go. In, we're in.
Okay.
Nice. Now we gotta do 2 more. These collars are rigid, that's for sure. Aptly named. So now let's get this front one in. Yank me down here somehow. Oh, actually, it's kind of
Gap.
close. I need more.
Yep. That should be it.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're not gonna be even close. It's way off.
shoot. If I can just get this to, without cross-threading, if I can get this to grab.
Yeah, it's so far off. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's not cross-threading. I just want to line it up here. Get it to, that's the beauty of the rigid collar, is it will pull everything nice and lined up.
Is it easier now?
Yeah.
So it found its way then.
Yep.
Yeah, let's go get that other one in there then. The other
You gotta
bolt,
pull, we gotta pull jacket. You gotta jack up the car a little bit. There we go, that's it. All right, we're
So
all,
you need this one to come back off? Or
well, let's go. I'm gonna work on the other side. It looks like we're back to straight. Even this bolt looks flush now. Okay, I'm back. Like, how many hours? 4 hours later, something like that. I don't even know what time it is. I don't even know what day it is. So, we're halfway through day 2. Rigid collars are done. So apparently, you know, this car, just that the subframe just doesn't drop very well on it. So what I had to do was go inside the car, and you can, there are some videos online on how to do this, but you go inside the car, you take this cover off, right, up under the steering column area. And then you're gonna mark it, but you're gonna take the bottom and top bolts out, and that way you can slide out so the steering column, or I guess the knuckle there that converts into the steering rack, you know, can slide out, right? And so that way, theoretically, then the subframe isn't sort of hung up on the, you know, on the steering, because the steering rack connects to the steering column right here. So the tie rods are left alone, but what we did is we would take bolt 1, bolt 2, bolt 3, and then loosen bolt 4, and then you saw us fumbling, racking on the darn subframe in order to get, having 3 people and sliding in there trying to get it set up. One thing I would highly suggest is leave at least one of the bolts in, because otherwise your subframe's going to go out of alignment, and then you can't get it back in the hole. And so, but you need enough play. You know, the way you're supposed to do this, the way that, like on my S2000, you would take this bolt out, the thing would drop down nicely, you could see in there, and you put your little rigid collar in, and then you put the bolt back in, and then you work at one bolt at a time. It just doesn't work on this subframe. I don't know what's still holding it up. Maybe someone can comment that's done a Civic, either you know, it's the EK9 Civic, a 96 to 2000 Civic, but for this application, we had to stick a crowbar in. Anyway, you saw us do that. So the rigid collars are in. I did the other side suspension, so that's done. So now we're going to get into the suspension here and finish this part up. Everything kind of goes together nicely, and I'm going to follow the same procedure I did on the other side, and so we're cheating a little bit here on getting this done. So first thing I'm going to do is put the camber arm, the upper control arm, in. So we're going to put the upper control arm in, then we're going to put the Moton in, and this one's going to be a little trickier, trying to figure out how we're going to route the reservoir. The other side was super easy, but we're going to figure that out here on camera, and then we'll put whatever this U-knuckle is, we'll put that in place, and then we'll, actually I take it back. First thing we got to do is put the lower control arm on. I forgot about this part. So this is a new hard race part. You can tell because there's a hard race sticker on it. Which has not solid, but new, stiffer urethane bushings. This is just a OE part that then Hard Race puts together and puts their bushings in place. And so they do sell this with pillow balls, like solid bushings, but obviously, you know, we don't want to do that because we don't want to rattle our teeth out. All right, so we're going to put this in place. So this bracket is what goes over top of this. So this bracket goes like so, and then the little grease. I guess it's not, I thought this was a grease fitting. It's not. This is just a locator tab so that you put this on properly. And so we're gonna have to remove. I'm gonna remove our subframe bolts here that I kind of loosely put in. just to line it up. And then we'll put this one in place. All right, so I need a 19. Put some gloves back on. So there are 3 bolts that hold this bracket in place. 2 on this side. These 2 are subframe alignment. This one is not. This is just a short bolt just to clamp the control arm in place. And just to kind of cue you in on the rigid collar here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. So this is F1, then F2 and 3, which we're about to take out now, and then F4 is on the back side here. And so those are the 4 bolts. This is the only bolt that has a locating collar that goes on the bottom and the top. So just know, if you're watching this video at some point in the future, just know that this subframe, you know, again, we took out the center motor mount bolt, we detached the steering column, and it still required us to jam a crowbar in there and try to snake it into place. Not a fun task. So the other thing you've got to keep in mind is that 2 of the collars, they had a flat side on them for these back 2 bolts that are next to each other. And so that's another tricky part. Since the subframe doesn't drop down, it's really hard to see in there. But anyway, we got the job done. And you'll notice on the instructions, if you buy this kit, instructions show you which one of these is which and how it orients, how it goes in by the diagram here. So you get the idea. Good luck. My suggestion, don't do it. Let's hope our whole subframe doesn't go out of whack. I mean, the collar should theoretically pull everything into alignment, so we shouldn't have any misalignment issues any longer. Short bolt goes in the back, long bolt goes in the front, and then we got a short bolt which goes in the inside of the car. That's this one. And then we got the spline bolt. The spline bolt goes through here. All right, so we take our control arm. Denoted left side, there's an L on it, so you don't get confused. Make sure this thing doesn't get in our way. Mother! Oh, God dang it. I really need to break out better words. Something's holding me up. All right, you're good. Okay, so shove that loosely in there, that 19 millimeter with splines on it. And then this points down. Make sure you have that oriented properly, and then we gotta put this bracket on. So, okay, that's a short one. Hope our rigid collars stay nicely aligned. Looks like they are. Okay. Long bolt in. So if you take the rigid collars out of the equation, we'd have been done with this yesterday. Perfect, 66 on the dot. Then there's a 22 mil. So I tightened this based on the other, you know, the OE part. That was or the OE, whatever you call this thing, control arm. Where you want it just tight enough where the little washer spins, it doesn't bounce. It's supposed to be 72 foot-pounds, I believe. So what I was just tightening was this piece here on the back side, which pulls everything together. Okay, so the control arm's in now. What I can do is I'm gonna put the upper camber arm in like we were talking about before. So you can see the hard race has some really stout, whatever you call those bolts for the camber, and then it has a cotter pin style bottom bolt. So we're gonna put the car down. So we put I needed to get a little more height so I could get that taller bolt out. So you gotta put this arm in first before you put the coilover in, otherwise you can't get the bolts in. And this was a 14 mil 1,000 more turns and I'm there. Set our strut tower brace out of the way. And now I gotta put the shock in. Slide that up through the top for me. Okay, now the tricky part. You gotta figure out where we're gonna fish this thing up through. But there should be enough room somewhere up in here to run this through. And then what we'll do, we'll tie this all up. So we're running back behind the alternator and around, making sure, and I'll tie it up to make sure it doesn't get anywhere near the axle shaft. And that should be just fine. Sweet. I'll probably tie it to this coolant line and we're good to go. Let's just double check from the top, heads up. Yeah, so then we can orient it however we need to orient it here. So we're gonna mount it somewhere in the vicinity of the strut tower brace. That'll be good. Okay, so let's put our lower control arm on. We found that doing the tie rods afterwards was probably the best way to do it. Put the bottom nut on. So when lowering the car, we want to keep the geometry the same. As the car comes lower, you know, the arms, everything changed, all the geometry changes. So option one is you do an extended roll center. This is called the RCA, a roll centered adjuster. This is taller than the factory one's, only about half as high, and so this changes the angle or changes the geometry of the suspension. Or you can do a short and drop fork. And so I chose to do the short and drop fork. You can see the height differences between the two. You know, it's a good, 1.5 to 2 inches shorter. So I'm going to slide this down. This has to come all the way up into the top position. So we do have a problem in that this bolt is about 10 millimeters too short, and it didn't come with a longer bolt. According to the photos from Hard Race whatever in Japan, it should come with it. And so we're putting a screw or bolt in here that will set the clamp on the base of the coilover. And then what we do is we bring the lower control arm up to the height of the drop fork. And so what you'll notice, this will keep more preload on the suspension as well. But one problem is my bolt is going to be too short, and so we're going to put this on and put a little Loctite on. I ordered some longer bolts from Master, but I don't know if I got the right ones or not, so we're going to put these in for now. Okay, drop fork done. Why does everything have to be so much more difficult? So this is reverse mounted, meaning it goes on the underside rather than the top side. Here's the spacer, and then the bottom nut. Of course, it's not a 19. It's a 22. I'm gonna get a coat of primer on the hub so I can paint this before I put the brakes. So I'll put a couple of coats of primer on, and then I'll put some caliper paint on this. I'll let that dry. This is most certainly not the best way to do this, but I value my paint not having overspray all over it more than I do of having a perfectly hidden hub. Okay, day 3. I'm cheating on you here a little bit like I do sometimes. We did the brakes on the other side because I knew I'd be fumbling through some stuff, and we're just running footage for hours and hours and hours. So it's easier to just kind of get into it. So first thing we're going to do is swap out the bolt that I talked to you about yesterday. The drop forks need a 120 millimeter bolt. The one that's provided is only 110 millimeters, the stock one. And so I ordered from McMaster-Carr. I couldn't find a zinc plated steel bolt. I could only find black oxide that has, what are these called? Cap heads, I think. So or flange head, I think it's called. So in order to get at least something that looks somewhat correct. I can only do black oxide, which this will probably end up rusting, but it looks pretty. I wish all the bolts looked black, but it probably won't stay that way. So let's swap that out, and then we're going to jump into the brakes. So here's our difference. Now the only disadvantage is I couldn't find any. This is a 1.75 millimeter thread versus a 1.25, but we should be okay. So you can see that extra 10 millimeters. So problem solved. Okay, so let's do the brakes. So your first question is, what about slotted, cross drill, blah, 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 vented, carbon ceramic? It's just find them for me and I'm in. But it's not so simple in that, I'm just doing the spoon stuff. So this is just a Honda rotor, probably off of an Accord or something like that. Okay, so the spoon provides some new washers and some new black oxide. These are, what are these, 15 millimeter bolts, I think. We're gonna take our caliper to load our pads. I learned a lesson yesterday that I don't actually need to take, when the pads aren't, what am I doing? I'm saying when the, whatever these things are called, the calipers aren't mounted, you can load the pads from the inside, but if they're mounted, then you have to take the pins out. Now, the only thing that's a little frustrating is that there's no set screws. You can't use the set screws on the factory hub. It doesn't work. And so everything will tighten down. So this will still wobble until this caliper tightens down. I'm doing my best to stay out of the way of the camera and sound. Talk you through it, which isn't always the easiest thing to do when you're trying to do a project. Something is not lining up. Should take freaking 2 seconds. All right, there we go. It's just the dust shield was bent in a little bit, so I can get that out of the way. That literally should take, maybe I should keep my mouth shut. That should take about 3 seconds to do. Every time I think I've got it licked, I always find something that doesn't work right. So I'm gonna take our twin bush, slide it under here. Okay, so this is the spoon brake line, and they're all labeled. So they're labeled which one's which, so I guess the label fell off of this one, but there it is. Front right or front left side. And so we want to try not to have brake fluid running all over the place. So let's cut our caliper loose. I think this was a 14. I'm going to break loose the bolt on because we reuse this. I wish they'd give you a new one. So we're going to reuse this on the spoon, but we're going to put some new washers. So we have these new copper washers that we're going to put on. And then because the factory brake line has this big sort of thick piece of metal here, we need a washer, and they don't provide us one. We need a washer for this top bolt here. Otherwise it hits the upper, whatever this C-arm is called. So I didn't have any thick zinc plated washer, so I'm just going to put just a lock washer. That's the only reason. It doesn't need to be a lock washer, it just needs to be thick enough to space the 12 millimeter bolt out. And so we learned our lesson. We'll put this on first, and then we can kind of guide this around and get it set up. So that's why it'd be nice if I had the bolt, I could just put this in place and then quickly swap over the top piece here, but we don't. And so first thing I'm going to do is break loose a flange nut up here. So this is I forget what this is called, but I think this is called a flange wrench. It's called something else. I'm just going to break this loose. So this is like I'll show you, it's like a fork that has to slide out. So what I did last time was do that, and wedge a screwdriver underneath it, and then once it comes out the first time, see what I'm saying? So there's like a little U channel in there that clips in place. We'll need to reuse that, so we need to keep that handy. So again, if I could do this all over again, I think what I would do is I'd just buy another factory bolt here. Washers on each side, it's copper washers. Now we know, because it's considerably different, it's considerably shorter than the stock one. And it tends to get bound up. Okay, the line's on. I think I'm most excited about the brakes. Okay, that way it worked a whole lot cleaner than the first time we did it. Learn a little bit when you screw it up every way possible, you know. Now, you gotta make sure that you push up. Let me put this pin back. There's a little groove on the brake lines. So this is the rear brake line. But see, there's a little groove here, and so you need to make sure that pushes up so that this can clamp around that. Otherwise, your brake line will be flopping around. Hope our pads stay yellow. I kind of like that. You know me, I'll be driving 35 and below only. So, and I don't even need brakes. I just coast to a stop because I'm such a terrible driver and super slow. And now, if I went to the track, then I would be able to go over 35. But since I don't, I got to stay below 35 miles an hour at all times. And do we have a completed front suspension? I think we do. What am I missing here? That's it, right? I learned a lesson the hard way in the past, as usual. Drain out whatever little bit of brake fluid we have left in here. But take your caliper and squeeze the piston in, but watch your eyes. So squeeze the back, the center piston in, that way you get as much fluid out of it as possible. But these will go in a box and stay with the car for the next guy in case when somebody wins this thing, in case they want to part it out. Dave and I were talking about this earlier. What I would do if I won this thing, I'd drive it for a few months, decide if I really loved it, decide if I wanted to carry insurance on this, depending on where you live, on how prone this would be to get stolen. And I would drop it off at a shop, drop all the OE parts off and part it out and get on the forums and sell all this crap. Pocket yourself 70, 80 grand and get yourself anything but the new M3. Freaking ugliest disaster I was distraught last night. That's our front suspension. So I'm gonna wait to put the wheels and stuff so you're gonna have to sit tight on that. But we've got a lot of work to do on playing with camber and toe and and figuring out what wheels fit, and I'm gonna do a clean up of all this stuff onto the rear.